I want to share with you guys a story. So, back when I was young, my parents, my family, they didn't have that much money. But for whatever reason, they had enough to send me to this 7-day Christian summer camp. Now, it was one of the more interesting experiences of my life. Now, of course, it's not going to be something super amazing like rocket ships or traveling to space, but I think you'll find it interesting nonetheless. So we go to this thing, and let me just start by saying that it was a very interesting cultural dynamic there, and it was exciting. So roughly 85 to 95% of the people there were black, and I would say there's a handful of Asians. You could count them on your hand, and almost all of them came with the group I came with the families that came with me, but not all of them did. And then, of course, the counselors were mostly white. It was a very interesting dynamic, and honestly, it was very exciting as well. You know, I don't think the culture or ethnicity or what skin color we had really played that much of a dynamic into what we did. I mean, the counselors, they were very energetic and they loved preaching and talking about what they wanted to talk about. And I remember, the kids would ask very simple questions, and the counselors would always be more than willing to answer those questions. I remember one kid asked one of the counselors, when did God get born? And when does God die? And then he answered like, oh, this, he doesn't die, he's eternal and all this stuff. But it was interesting. Now, what I found really cool about the camp was that despite it seeming like, for whatever reason, it seemed low budget, we still had so much fun and we still had access to quite a lot of stuff. It was quite interesting how that worked. Maybe it wasn't as low budget as I perceived it to be, but I mean, the kids there, they didn't seem to come from really rich families either. And at the same time, for whatever reason, our camp was in a area that I guess they rented out completely, because we had access to a pool where we could play, and that was really cool. And then we had access daily to snacks and the food. I mean, don't get me started on the food, but the food was just incredible. It was out of this world. And I mean, you could come back for second servings, third servings, fourth servings. And because I was one of those kids who could eat whatever he wanted and had that reputation for doing so and not get fat, that's what I did. And it was like every single day for lunch, dinner, and breakfast, they had something different. It was like they had this whole like food system set up, and it was, for whatever reason, it was better than any type of school cafeteria food I've ever eaten. Because even then, though, schools, they tend to get, you get used to that food fairly quickly. But it wasn't like they were rich. Never got that impression that any of the people there were rich. I just guess they were good cooks. It was homemade food, and they had all sorts of options. I think even one day they had Chinese food. The other day it was like fried chicken, all sorts of really good food, spaghetti, pasta, breakfast foods, French toast, all this stuff. And it was just really fun and yet very regimented in a good way. Nowadays your sleep schedule and all this stuff can be really sort of screwed up. But at that camp, everyone had to get up at the same time, 6 a.m. And because it was like in the mountains or something, uh, every morning it was like really foggy and misty, generally speaking. And occasionally, like one day out of the 7 hours there, it was like really warm. The other days it was really cold when you got up. But it's kind of like those things where like you're in the army and you have to get up at a certain time. So we did, and no one complained about it, and we just got used to it, and it didn't seem as hard after a while. So that was really fun. And then on top of that, like we had activities. So they had a Olympics theme to them, and then we like competed. There's different age groups, and we competed to see who would win. And we did all sorts of activities. Some of them which were pretty basic, but it was fun nonetheless. They didn't cost a lot of money, but they were really fun. Like one time we had to do like athletics, and who could do the most got the most points for their specific country. We represented countries like in the Olympics. So I remember like we were all just chilling there, And one guy, I mean, he was a really cool, fun guy. He was black, and he was really big, and he was overweight, and he was an awesome guy nonetheless. And he couldn't do any sit-ups, so they let him do half sit-ups, like a half a sit-up, because he couldn't do a full sit-up. And then he did like 100 and got us like so many points, and I found that was really funny. Um, and so it was a really cool dynamic. Everyone laughed, everyone had fun, and it wasn't about like uh, race or color at all, which I found very interesting. And then at the final ceremony, it was also one of those blends of different cultural dynamics and history, because one of the few Asian people that went there, I remember she was like very clearly Asian, and so she played this like very competitive, intricate performance on the violin at the ending ceremony. I guess she volunteered to do it or whatever. It was kind of out of place, and nonetheless, everyone was impressed and they all clapped. I would say there was like 100 people at the final ceremony. So each of us, we had like our own little like speech or